And actually we have Charity Hall, Hallman. So
hey,
good morning. Charity Hallman is a senior vice president for the Hope Credit Union, and so welcome to the conversation. So I know you just got here, so we're going to just change it up a little bit. I'm going to follow up to talk about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So if we can cue up the slides, and then we'll move it over to you, Charity. All right. Okay, I think I can start. Oh, there we go. All right. So LISC is part of a coalition that won $2 billion from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a $27 billion program to drive market transformation, to bring climate finance to meet the country's climate goals, but to benefit all communities. And there's a special designation focused on low-income communities. 42% of all emissions come from homes, and so that is the focus of the Power Forward Communities Coalition. We are squarely focused, as we say, on communities and households, and providing access to capital in order to lower emissions and build resiliency. The goals of the program are focusing on low-income and disadvantaged communities in a way to meet our goals, adding hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs. So job creation, green jobs is a core focus of the program. We're also hoping to save an average of $1,700 annually in energy costs for households and improving health outcomes. So as we talk about the impacts of climate change, by bringing financing for decarbonizing affordable housing through electrification, these are how we're seeking to achieve the aims of the Power Forward communities. So as I mentioned, we are providing low-cost capital from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funds and other sources. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, by the way, is Ronnie, is it the largest grant allocation from within the Inflation Reduction Act? It's one. Most of it is tax incentives, but this is an actual allocation of capital to activate climate finance. There are significant challenges in the financing. First of all, not only is the market broken, but there's a nascent market. So it's, even though we have capital, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to build an ecosystem to deliver that capital, from financial intermediaries to project developers that need the capacity in order to develop these types of projects. For low-income and disadvantaged communities, we need trusted outreach. When you have a government program that's offering to provide benefits, we need trusted community-based organizations and intermediaries to flow the capital. And finally, capital is not sufficient. It's the consumers who actually drive the demand. And so the program is intended not only to provide capital, but also to drive demand through what's called market building. And that means building capacity for building owners, developers, project developers, workforce development contractors, and a whole range of partners. And Power Forward, coming to answer this call, the Power Forward Communities is made up of these organizations, including LISC, Enterprise, Rewiring America, Habitat for Humanity, and United Way, and collectively, we are seeking to deploy $2 billion over the course of 7 years. Our strategy, as I mentioned, it's about assessing the market, supporting local project cost analysis. When you have a building, what are the specific elements of decarbonizing the building? What is the economic feasibility of going all electric in a building and converting the heat and water systems? So these are the kinds of supports that we're providing in the market assessment. On the market engagement, it's really about building and driving demand and working through trusted organizations. And so there's a specific set of work that's around building market connectivity. And from a LISC perspective, I think one of the advantages that we have is we have partners like you in the room, especially serving rural communities, because we know that money will not flow until it goes through the set of organizations and intermediaries that can help to develop these projects. And finally, products and services, not only is it capital, but it's also development of software to make building assessments easier or underwriting easier, but also workforce development, pre-development support. And then finally, market management. I mean, the most important thing here is that we're learning through these projects and that we share the learning so that we can achieve the scale that we need to move around the work. This slide is an illustration of, let's say, a building that has $40,000 per unit cost in order to decarbonize it. And so at the bottom, you see, the various sources of money. So you have federal climate incentives, you have state and local incentives, you have market development, you have carbon reduction fund. So these are all sources of subsidy. And as you add those layers of subsidy, we get closer to supporting the overall project cost. The last column 5, financing, we believe that we can generate subsidized capital, underwrite for anticipated energy savings, and ultimately make these transactions economically feasible, because that's the most important thing, make the transactions economically feasible and lower operating and utility costs. Our financial products will close the gap, and I'll just conclude here, is that we have a range of financial products for multifamily renovations, rehab, multifamily new construction, single family existing building renovation, and single family new construction. We have flexible loan terms. We have a subordinated debt product with interest rates up to 3% or lower. With highly flexible terms. We have construction capital, we have permanent capital. So we really cover the entire development phase, and we're eager to support the range of projects that you all will be providing for us. With that, I will finish it off and then hand it over to Charity. And we'll ask Charity to give us a perspective from a rules standpoint.
Good morning, everyone. And sorry for being a little late. I'm going to stand if that's okay. Sure. I do a little better that way. So I have the pleasure of serving as the Senior Vice President for Community Development at Hope Enterprise Corporation, a credit union. And as a native Arkansan, welcome to our state. I hope you're enjoying it. Secondly, I grew up in a rural community, a persistent poverty community. So it is a pleasure to be with all of you today. And it is why this program is so important. And let's see, is the PowerPoint up? It's coming, that's no big deal. And it's one of the reasons I love working for Hope. Our mission, we have had a shared commitment to improving the lives of underserved communities for 30 years, and that hasn't changed. But the tools have gotten better, right? And that is part of what we're going to be talking today about, is how this tool that we've received through the IRA and what it can do for communities. And that is not mine. I'm gonna keep going. So you all know that there are unique challenges for rural communities, right? Or else you wouldn't be in this room. But I want to really bring the humanity component to when we're talking about green energy and why this is important. This is no longer sort of a nice to have. The more I get into this work, I would argue that this is a necessary component to thriving communities and life. Yes, this is me. For life, because there is research. It's a little bit about Hope. I'll back up a second. We started out serving about 55 communities and now have grown through support and collaboration to serve 5 states: Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana. That's what we affectionately call our region, the Deep South. And it's a place we love. We are very in touch with the underserved community, as you can see from our membership on the screen. And they are really what propelled us to even put this application forward, because they were scared. Our members were scared they were going to be left out of this green energy transition. And if you know much about how solar works, you know that has been the case, because if you did not have cash, if you did not have assets, you were not able to put solar on your home, your roof, your whatever you want to put it on. You couldn't do it because there isn't a lease option or financing, and the tax credits they didn't help you. So that's what brings us to hope. And I want you to take a really good look at this map, because this helps you see in that circle, it's kind of light, right? This little dark, those dark areas, dark isn't good. That is showing you where the energy burden, which is the percent of your income you're spending on energy, is roughly almost 20% for the Deep South. And these are already states where persistent poverty is chronic, right? This is a real issue of choosing between medicine, rent, opportunities for your children, your family. And it's even worse if you're in a rural community, right? There are various studies that make this point over and over. Why is it so high? Why is the energy burden so high? Many of you are builders in this room, so you know probably better than I. We're talking about older housing. We're talking about less energy efficient appliances. We're talking about all of that compounds, right? The envelopes, putting solar on the roof, if it's all going out the windows, that's the saying, right, doesn't help. So there's a part to play for all of this to work together. And I'll bring this point home for Arkansas. We have an unemployment rate of under 4%. That's pretty amazing, right? But still, 15% of our Kansans are classified as extremely low income. And for these families, their energy burden's 19%. So this is a real issue. Climate is getting worse. That's another compounding factor. In Arkansas alone, we had 50 days where the temperature was over 95, sometimes reaching 107. I know it doesn't feel like that today, right? It's a little cold. But that compounded with storm damage, you get the picture, right? Resiliency, clean energy, health, asthma, all of these things are connected. And I think this is why it is so important for all of us to dig in. I realize it is like drinking from a fire hose to learn how to actually leverage these programs, but I encourage you to please take that deep dive with the rest of us, because it is necessary, and this is the first time it has truly been possible for low and moderate income individuals to take advantage of these programs. And so the next map, when we talk about equity, this is also communities of color overwhelmingly impacted. You can see what we call like the black belt, again, my little pointer here, but you can see this overlapping territory. So if you care about these communities, if you care about your neighbors, I just invite you to really dig in. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I don't want to repeat too much, but huge, $27 billion. And don't be afraid of the change in the administration, in my mind. Like if we are working, if we are making impact, community members, your representatives are going to get on your side, right? They just need to see action and impact. And so this is an opportunity. They are relying on community lenders because community lenders are often closest to the ground. So that is why this money is flowing through so many of those organizations, but we cannot do it alone. We will not be able to do it alone. We will need partners, and I'm going to talk a little more about that. There is a common theme here, LIDAC. That's a new acronym. Learn it. You're going to need it, right? If you're going to be in this energy transition, LIDAC, LIDAC, LIDAC. And I'm going to give you some tools to see that. Okay, so, you can't really see it on this slide. There are 3 buckets of money. My colleagues up here have talked about those other 2. I really want to focus on the $7 billion. That's the Solar for All program that HOPE will be administering. But these other 2 programs will offer you the technical assistance and will offer a variety of other energy efficiencies that you can take advantage of as builders. That will also come through community lenders. That will be a complement to residential solar or multifamily solar. And together, those things need to be working in collaboration. They should not be apart. Okay, so there were 60 of these Solar for All awards. I'm clearly going to be talking about Arkansas and Mississippi for the next few slides, but the program components, the outlines, are very much the same. I invite you, please go find out if your state is one of the other 58 awardees, because they're running this program. They're working to figure it out. They're on the same timelines we are. So why is Arkansas different than Mississippi? There's a lot of reasons for that, but in this right here, it is really about batteries. The policy environment in Arkansas changed. We used to have net metering 1-to-1. That went away on September 30th. We knew that was coming. We've had a very robust solar developer climate here, ecosystem, and we knew this was going to be something we had to overcome. So batteries will be a component of all the Arkansas projects. We are trying to figure out when that will happen for Mississippi projects as well. But this is not just about lowering energy costs. There's a workforce component to it. This is also about building wealth. I'm sure many of you have seen the studies where it says most Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency. 2 years ago, the headline was most Americans couldn't afford a $500 emergency. So even if they are able to put $1,700 back into the pocket of a family, that is huge. That can keep someone from being homeless. So just a real piece of that. We've had some great partners. The Arkansas Advanced Energy Foundation was a great partner for us, just to call them out. But every state has someone who's focused on this. Okay, what are these key features? I'm going to skip that slide because it's hard to read. So what are the key features here? It is that it's residential. For the Solar for All program, residential, if someone's sleeping there. But it doesn't have to just be homes. It could be a dorm. It could be a nursing home. It could be a homeless shelter. But it needs to have a residential component. The second piece of this is that it needs to produce like a 20% savings. That's key. It's necessary. You have to get to 20% savings. You talk to some solar developers, they're like, that's easy. We're going to be holding them to that. It provided some funding for enabling measures, but there are other programs like for energy efficiency, REAP, those other things. We really want to use those. We also need to leverage, right? The federal government wants a return on this. So we're thinking about how do we leverage that? How do we include funders so that we can scale this program and grow it? And lastly, again, LIDAC communities. So let me break this down a little bit more in practical terms. HOPE is going to be focused on single-family residential solar, multifamily solar, and community solar. Multifamily, think about LIHTC apartment complexes, think about public housing, other apartment complexes. One of the key pieces is not every single home or building has to be a low-income home. It has to be located in a LIDAC census tract. So there is a lot of flexibility to this program if you just think about it. These are some of the enabling measures. Talked about those. So you're probably wondering, is my community eligible? There are 4 ways to become eligible. The first is looking at the CJES map, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. That's the easiest thing. You can go in, type in your address. If you don't qualify that way, you should look at the EG screen. This is if think about your community, if it has suffered climate damage or actually environmental damage, like brownfields, lead in the water, other issues. There could be another way to qualify. Also, we can do individual home qualification, right? Like person to person. And lastly, if you are building affordable housing, that is a way to qualify. And just to put this in perspective, if you can see Arkansas, all the gray areas qualify. That's almost the entire state. And if I did the same map in Mississippi, it would almost be the entire state. There is so much flexibility here. Okay, program economics. Oh man, the colors are not coming through for some reason. Okay, so the 30% base, that's normal. That's been there for a while. There are these 2 other adders, depending on how you stack this deck, domestic content and an energy community. Those maps help you do that. There are 4 other 10%, 2 of those are 10% adders and 2 are 20% adders. So you could, if you stack this deck, this is not hard math, guys. We're just adding, a couple of digits here. But you could reduce the cost of solar by 60% if you stack this deck right. You've got to be strategic. And the other thing I should say is this is not a handout program. The people who will receive this subsidized solar will be paying for it. They won't receive it for free, but they might only have to pay 40%. This is like the best Black Friday deal you could have. So just, like start wrapping your head around this. Tax credit financing is not new. It's just a little newer and way more advantageous right now for the green energy field. This is a complicated flow chart of how this could look, but it is really about the lessor and one of the ways it could work. What I don't want to do is spend too much time breaking this down. This is really going to be project dependent. But one of the things I will say about the single family residential solar is we will be putting an RFP out in early 2025 that for a lessor for our two states. And that is one of the ways we will, I know there's a lot of conflict about like, oh, they're leasing it, but this is the way to make the program economics work. It also takes away operations and maintenance and those other issues that they would have to deal with solar. For multifamily and community solar, it's a little different construction structure. Okay, so this is kind of where we are. You haven't missed anything. The money is allocated. It is contractually obligated to many of the winners. Some even have it in the bank, but it is still coming, and it will be launched and sometimes in 2025. It is complicated, but we will get there. And last, I just want to say, like, the power of collaboration, this is something Hope believes in. It's something that it is how we have grown to serve our communities. And we will need all of you to invest your time and your energy with us. If you are a community advocate, we invite you to be part of this conversation to help distill. There have been a lot of bad actors out there in the solar developer world. So we will have to break down some of that and rebuild trust. And we can't do that alone. If you're a developer, please start thinking about green energy, not as an adder, but as something as a must to just the cost of doing business to build good homes. And if you're a funder, definitely talk to us because we want to grow this. So thank you for your time. Again, apologies for the interruption.
Thanks, Charity. So we're now going to round out the full picture with an overview of some details of specific provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act that Ronnie will cover.
Okay. So I know my slides are in here because we tried to give them to Charity 15 minutes ago. But I know we're throwing a lot of information at you guys this morning. We're going to try to pull the puzzle pieces together and help ensure you have what you need to make some stuff happen in the real world. So a few notes here. We talked at the top about the identification of a problem, that is climate change, and the ways in which this administration has tried to respond. And I noted that we've tried to respond in lots of different ways. This has not been a single punch response. We're throwing lots of punches. And John and Charity have done a great job of talking about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and how that low-cost capital pool is one of the punches. I'll spend a few quick minutes talking about tax incentives, a different punch that we've thrown, but in many ways a really significant one. Most of the early estimates indicated that more than $400 billion would ultimately flow as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. And the majority of that money will flow through tax incentives. So you do yourself a disservice if you don't pay attention to this piece of the puzzle. And so I did want to spend a few minutes there. What I'll do to try to pull the conversation in a little bit is I'll talk about a set of tax incentives and other benefits that are specifically accessible in the context of housing to multifamily developers, to building owners, to resident landlords. There are lots of other tax credits outside of this list, but this is a particular focus that I wanted to hone in on today. And we can have a similar type of conversation about lots of other potential tax credit claimants. But one of the things we're very much trying to do, going to the same point Charity made, is to make energy burdens lower for people in the residential context. And these tax incentives are a big piece of how that's done. Before talking tax credit details, I wanted to spend half a second on this slide. So I've spent a bunch of this year traveling around talking to folks who are in the process of leveraging these tax incentives. And what I've done here is, in effect, reproduce a little bit of what I've heard. Like, why are you doing this project? Why are you trying to tap into this incentive? Why are you going through that were layered into the Inflation Reduction Act that further reduce the cost point. This also goes to the great slide that John presented, where the goal is to make sure these projects are genuinely economically viable. And these tax credits essentially chop off a piece of the stack and get you to a place where you can make things happen. The last thing I'll note here, another, in the big scheme of things, minor change, but in the real world, major change that happened with the IRA is the way in which these tax credits intersect with LIHTC. And so post passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, if you utilize the investment tax credit in the context of a housing development project, that no longer reduces the investment basis for LIHTC purposes. And that, in short, just makes the LIHTC money stretch further and cover more of the cost. It just makes the math work. And so that was a big change, that important change that happened in the context of the IRA. If that's the ITC, there's another important incentive, 45L. And what you've done here conceptually is you've moved from renewable energy projects to energy efficiency upgrades. So this is taking a building and making it run effectively on lower amounts of energy usage. And so this is heating and cooling systems, hot water systems, the building envelope, lighting, et cetera. The IRA was helpful in that it made the maximum value of the 45L tax credit larger. It also made a similar change as the one I mentioned with the investment tax credit, where use of 45L no longer reduces the investment basis for purposes of LIHTC. So if you're doing new construction, because 45L is essentially about new construction, you can upgrade that property with a range of different energy efficiency products and types of equipment, and the government will help you pay for it. That's what 45L is all about. 179D is very similar in structure, with the difference being that you can use this in the context of retrofits. And so John talked about a lot of the financial products that the Power Forward team are putting together. Some are for new construction, some are for rehab. And so like our great hope is that as people dig into their rehab projects, they take that extra step and a half to ensure that their rehab includes energy efficiency upgrades that get them in the box for 179D. And then 179D effectively becomes part of a larger capital stack. Like 45L, the maximum amount of 179D was also increased in the Inflation Reduction Act. Another win. All of these little tweak here, little change here, little improvement here. When you add it all up, it can make a really big difference. The other change in that lane is historically, nonprofits and other tax exempt entities couldn't take advantage of 179D. we also made a real attempt to try to address that by allowing nonprofits to effectively monetize 179D by allocating the value of that deduction to their contractor, to their designer. So whatever they were going to charge you, if you agree to give them your 179D tax deduction, presumably that price point comes down a little bit. It's a win on both sides. A few more things. 30C, as we think about creating a broader landscape in which we're using cleaner energy and we're using energy efficiently, there's also a component that relates to driving different vehicles. And if you're going to drive different vehicles, it helps to be able to refuel those vehicles or charge those vehicles up. So there's a tax credit in the IRA for EV charging stations and refueling stations. And so if you think about where your housing development is located, it may make sense to add a charger or 3 or 5. You know, there may be cases where if you happen to be in a traffic corridor, you can think of your charging station as potentially another revenue stream. If people are stopping at your location to get their cars charged, even if they don't live there or work there. 25C, I'll mention just briefly. This is largely a tax credit that is applicable to consumers or individual homeowners, but there are cases, for instance, with smaller multifamily developments where the landlord and owner of the building also lives in the building, where that allows that owner, that landlord, to leverage 25C in the way a single family homeowner might leverage 25C. And that may, in certain cases, be a valuable option. Earlier, we talked about 45L and 179D. Those tax incentives generally relate to a suite of energy efficiency upgrades. And so we're essentially asking you to do a handful of things at the same time, which may be perfectly doable, plausible, workable, and great for your scenario. 25C is a little different in that 25C functions as a la carte menu, and you can do, you know, one thing at a time, perhaps year after year after year. And so for a particular resident landlord, that may be a better, you know, more feasible option. And so I wanted to highlight that. The last thing I'll mention, just for my dear colleagues at the Department of Energy, another piece of the puzzle are the rebate programs that also, again, chip away at this need to make our buildings more energy efficient. And these rebate programs are tailored specifically for low-income individuals and low-income communities. And so it's another piece of the puzzle. If you're looking at the total amount of money you need to get to the finish line, the tax credits may be a piece. The rebates may be a piece. Then low-cost capital from, you know, either friend sitting on stage with me might be a piece, and you get to the finish line in a way that makes sense and ends up being a win for everybody. So I wanted to make sure you were broadly introduced to those pieces. The last stop I'll take is direct pay. I mentioned that 179D was changed in a way that allows nonprofits to better monetize that deduction. For many of the tax credits, direct pay is the path to monetization. Pre-IRA, a lot of these tax credits existed, but for state and local governments, for nonprofits, for other tax-exempt entities that don't pay federal taxes on a regular basis, they were effectively irrelevant because they couldn't monetize them. If you're not paying taxes, a tax offset doesn't get you very far. Direct pay has changed that for many of these tax credits, because what you can do is essentially get my colleagues at the IRS to affirmatively send you a check and the exact amount of what that tax credit would have been. And so that opens up real opportunities for tax-exempt entities to tap into the investment tax credit, into 30C. And so another very big deal piece of the IRA puzzle. And we're off to a good start. This slide just notes that more than 1,200 organizations already have direct pay projects in the pipeline. This slide lays out the steps. They're good 1-pagers and 2-pagers that we put together that walk you through this as well. But, you know, there's a process to follow, but at the end, there's a, you know, a pot of gold. And so that's a good program, right? And I'll close here. You know, one of the best parts of my job has been the ability to travel around the country and see projects in real life, you know, as opposed to over the internet. And I've thought that the dynamic in the faith-based community has been really inspiring, because there are churches all over the country that have done projects just like this project at Watts Willowbrook, and it's made a tremendous difference to their energy cost profile. I'll sort of close with an anecdote from a recent trip to Atlanta. I stopped by Oakhurst Presbyterian Church that's in Decatur, and we talked about direct pay, and I asked them a bunch of questions about ways we can improve the program and make it more accessible. And we walked away with a list. With these government programs, there are always ways to make them better. And I was getting ready to leave, and they were like, don't leave, we want to show you something. I was like, okay, show me something. And so they run and they pull a couple of utility bills out of the top drawer in the desk in the office where we were sitting, one from 4 months ago or so. And the dollar amount at the bottom of that utility bill was $1,483. Relatively big church. They run a daycare out of the building. There's a lot of stuff happening there. So that's more or less what they've been paying for utilities historically. And they went back to the desk and grabbed another utility bill, which was from the prior month, that they wanted to show me. And that utility bill was $43, which is a difference. It's more, I conceded that it was more than a rounding error. And that dynamic will play out differently in different contexts, but it is illustrative of the type of impact that can be had here if you leverage these opportunities well. So I'll stop there. Lots of resources that we tried to put together that we'll do everything we can to make sure you have your hands on. But
and apologies. We're gonna have to wrap this up in the next 4 or 5 minutes. So I don't think we'll have a chance to take any questions. However, we will be around, so please feel free to reach us after the session. But so I think a couple things really quickly. Top of mind, new administration. How should we think about the implications of a new administration relative to these programs?
So I'll say a couple of things. I mean, the easy and in many ways true answer is I don't know.
All right, next question.
If there's anything we can say, there's a degree of unpredictability with the incoming administration. But I'll say a couple of things that I think are true. We've worked really, really hard to frankly show up at places like this to talk about these opportunities. That type of effort might not manifest itself with the incoming administration. And so in some ways it puts more pressure on this ecosystem to lift up these opportunities and make sure people know about them. The other thing, and Charity hinted at this, as you're doing these projects, promote them, lift them up, make sure they're known, talk to your member of Congress about them, because that actually may end up being consequential as people start to consider tweaks and changes. So I'd say
particularly in rural areas.
Mm-hmm. Especially that. I would say a couple of things. One, there is a lot of appreciation for the steps the administration has taken to quickly move such a creative and large program forward. We're all working very quickly. And HOPE has a contract, right? And these funds are legally obligated. And that has happened in the midst of 6 months and lots of program reviews. And yes, things can change, but steps have been taken. And I feel like every awardee of these programs has taken this seriously, and they have worked to do all the things they can do to secure the funding. But the proof's always in the pudding, right? Like, are you making this work? Are you having an impact? And then make sure your local media knows about it. Make sure people see that this is about jobs and health. It is not a right or a left issue. It is a life issue that I think all of us, in some way, there's something in it for everybody, whether it's resiliency, the economy, the climate. There's just a lot of great things I think you can find in this in collaboration. So that's what I would say. And cross your fingers.
Yeah, I mean, it's really trying to get some demonstration work on the ground, especially again in rural areas to show the value. And so I'll just close with this. We threw a lot of information. Even my head was starting to spin a little bit, but we know it's a lot of information. This is a brand new program. It's a new financing form. It's new engineering in many cases with buildings. And so the program has built-in technical assistance. And so the Power Forward communities, we will be offering technical assistance. And most importantly, I would just encourage you to work with our rural LISC officers to understand and ultimately talk through some projects that we may be ultimately able to support and work you through the range of different incentives, both at the federal, state, and local level. So with that, I want to thank our panel for joining us today. And so please thank them. And with that, as they leave the stage, I'll introduce our next speaker. So Dr. Basil Gooden was confirmed by the United States Senate to serve as Undersecretary for Rural Development on Monday, February 26, 2024. Prior to his confirmation, Gooden served as a Director of State Operations for Rural Development, where he led and supported USDA's team of 47 rural development state directors. From 2016 to 2018, he served as the third Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry for the Commonwealth of Virginia. He is a native of Buckingham County, Virginia, where he and his family still own and operate a cattle farm. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Gooden.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Rural America is hometown America. It's part of all of us, powering communities, feeding families, providing the everyday essentials we all depend on. It's a place to settle in, plant roots, and grow a family. It can be a home, a place to relax and create memories. Home ownership helps build community. And America's small towns thrive when people are invested in and connected to where we live. For many, having a place to call home reflects the promise of America. At USDA Rural Development, we work each day to make that dream a reality. We partner with local organizations to bring safe, affordable homes within reach. Together, we help you, our friends and neighbors, buy, build, and repair homes of your own, creating a strong foundation for the future. Our programs can help you avoid large down payments, improve and modernize your home, and begin building your story. Whatever home looks like to you, we stand ready to help, because when rural people thrive, America thrives.
Well, good morning. Good morning. I am honored and delighted to join you today. That was a neat video. That was the first time I'd seen that video, actually. And so we have several videos that we show across the country, really highlighting the tremendous work that we do at Rural Development. And so this was a great video. Good morning, Rural LISC. And actually, I just want to spend a little bit of time with you this morning doing a couple of things. One, expressing appreciation and gratitude for the tremendous work that you do in Rural LISC and LISC in general. Two, want to talk a little bit about partnerships that we have across the country. And then three, I want to talk about people because it's at the end of the day, it really is about the people that make things happen. And throughout this my brief remarks, I really will try to be very brief this morning. Going to talk a little bit about processes as well. But first, let's talk a little bit about people. I have been at rural development. This is actually my second time at USDA rural development. I previously served as a state director in the Obama administration. Tremendous experience, really seeing things on the ground level, like the work that you do across rural LISC. You're there on the ground doing the tremendous work. I left that position as a state director in 2016 when the previous administration came in, and then that same administration will come in January of 2025. But just wanted to tell you a little bit about what some of the changes that had happened, because when we left in 2016, we came back to a different type of administration in 2021. And then I want to talk a little bit about how we invested in people to try to make a difference in the work that we do together. So when I left in 2016, USDA rural development, the workforce was at about 6,200 people. So again, I know many of you may remember, but you also maybe said that wasn't enough people in our field offices to really deliver the services, to do the work that needs to be done across rural America. Because as you know, in rural development, we have a broad array of community and economic development tools that can transform lives, that can change communities and families. But again, we need people at the end of the day to actually deliver and implement that work. So when we left 2016, we had 6,200 people. Came back in 2021, rural development had less than 4,200 people. We actually had about 4,100 people. The majority of those individuals then actually reported to the headquarters, reported to Washington, D.C. And that's a problem on several levels. One, to change rural America, you need to be in rural America, like you are. So when you have a reduction in workforce and you have more people reporting to the headquarters and not to the state offices, that becomes very problematic in our delivery of services. So what we attempted to do when I became the Undersecretary of Rural Development, we tried to change those dynamics and hire more people to put into the field. It was a challenge because, again, in federal government, you're operating on limited resources. You have a limited budget, and you have so many competing priorities. And so, but we made a determination that in order for us to be the best agency that we can be, we needed to invest in the people and put people back in the fields to strengthen the partnerships that we have across the country. And so what we did was really focus on trying to hire. And that's exactly what we did in USDA rural development over the course of the past year. I am excited to announce that as of last week, we got the headcount report. We started at less than 4,200 people when we came in. As of last week, we have over 5,000 people at USDA rural development. And the majority of those people actually work in the state offices. And so why that's important? Because we firmly believe that that the decision making, that the agency and the good work needs to be pushed down to the lowest level of operations in any organization. I served in the military, and so one thing that really came through was that, hey, they make our policy decisions at the Pentagon, and that's similar to what we do at USDA rural development. We do provide the vision for rural development in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters, but the work, of rural development, whether it's through our housing programs. We have tremendous housing programs. Again, you talk about economic mobility, especially in underserved and minority communities. Our housing programs are tremendous, tremendous tools that can really change, again, not only the lives, but the families and the communities that we serve. We have healthcare programs, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the healthcare projects that I was able to see across the country. And again, high-speed internet, broadband, tremendously important in rural America. We do a whole lot in USDA rural development, but again, it's through our people. And when I talk about people, we have in this room several state directors and several people from USDA rural development. If I could ask the folks from USDA rural development, if you could stand, and I just want you to recognize these people because these are the people that set the priorities in your states. Tremendous, tremendous state directors. Tremendous people in USDA rural development. I want to say, when I first came back to USDA rural development, I actually served in a role, director of state operations. And I got the opportunity to work with and bring on state directors from across the country, brought on 47 state directors. And I say this day in and day out, I could not be more proud of the cohort of state directors that we've brought in because it reflects the diversity of the United States. Here's what we feel is vitally important at USDA Rural Development is that the people delivering the services should look like the communities that we're here to serve and understand the communities that we're here to serve. And so that's why I'm so excited that 60% of the state directors in rural development are female, are women. And almost 40% are people of color. Now, that's totally unheard of previously in rural development or any federal agency like that. So I'm excited, so proud to work along these individuals, but also we have a tremendous program that actually LISC is a national partner, a leader in, and it's called our Rural Partners Network program. That program is certainly making a transformational difference in rural America, in the communities that it serves. It is, as you know, an all-of-government approach. It is bringing together resources at the federal level, partnering with folks at the state level and at communities levels. It really is working with underserved and under-resourced communities. That's the charge of the Rural Partners Network. And it is doing a tremendous job in rural America. And it really is due to the leadership that we have in that program. And we have representatives from the White House. We have Kellyanne Blaznak and Will McEntee with us today. They are actually providing leadership at the White House. But in our agency, and it speaks volumes that the White House representatives are here. Again, they have so many competing priorities, but also the leadership that we have with Rural Partners Network. I'm telling you, I've worked with the leader of RPN for many years, and you could not find a finer gentleman, a leader, a visionary, someone who really understands rural America and how to bring partners together. And that's Lee Jones that we have here. And you'll hear from him later on, actually. I told Lee, I'll just get up here and just, lower the bar for him because he'll have a panel here to really talk more about the details about some of the key work that we're doing. But let me just tell you why I'm spending so much time talking about people, because people make the difference. Here's what I see and what I've seen throughout my nearly 30 years of public service. I'm a huge fan of public service, huge fan of getting out in the communities. There's a big difference between policy and processes and implementation. We spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. focusing on policies, how things should work, regulations, rules. But at the end of the day, it's the implementation of our programs that really make a difference. we need to focus more, and that's what we attempted to do in the last couple of years at Rural Development, is to really focus on the delivery of programs to reduce the obstacles and the barriers. Here's what I know, and I say this a lot, that although we have a plethora, we have 74 programs in our portfolio at USDA Rural Development. But what we know and what we understand is that our programs don't align nicely with the needs that you see on the ground, with the communities that you work. We have some great housing programs, but oftentimes these programs won't reach some of the areas that you know are hard to serve and need these programs as well. We have some infrastructure programs. We do tremendous programs around bringing clean water to communities. And again, it's working with partners like Rural LISC, like RCAP, that really to help and the National Rural Water Association to deliver clean water to rural communities. Because that's what it's about. We're here not just to deliver programs and services. We are here to move the needle. We're here to change lives. That's what we do when we partner and collaborate with one another. What I will say to you is that, and again, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what a significant investment we've made through our Rural Partners Network. But let me just tell you a little bit why this is important to me. So I tell this story oftentimes when I'm speaking, and many of you may have heard this, but I'm from Virginia. I'm a beef cattle farmer from the state of Virginia. Raised Black Angus beef. Oh, there you go. We got some. Yeah, absolutely. Black Angus beef cattle. That's what we raised. Small operation, cow-calf operation. Grew up on this farm. And when I turned 17, my dad took me to college. I went to Virginia Tech as an undergraduate. And so gathered up all my earthly goods, and my dad took me to Blacksburg, Virginia. That was the first time I had set foot on that campus, but I knew I wanted to go to Blacksburg because it's land-grant university, and just heard so much about it. Went to Virginia Tech. Dad dropped me off. I was 17 years old. When my father was leaving campus, he said, "Hey, here you go." You know, and my father he was actually an educator. He was a school principal, but he was also a farmer and a realist and a pragmatist. That's one thing I could say about rural folks. We're very practical and we're pragmatists. And so when my dad was dropping me off, as he was leaving, my dad told me three things. He told me to study hard to get good grades. That was the first thing he told me. Second thing he told me was to stay out of trouble. I don't know why he had to tell me to stay out of trouble, but anyway, he said to stay out of trouble. But the third thing he said to me, and what is really resonates with me every day, which really shook me, and it really stunned me, as he was leaving campus, he looked at me and said, "And when you finish this college career, don't come back to the country. There are no opportunities in the country. You focus on going to the areas where there are jobs. Don't come back to the country." Now, the gentleman who told me what it was like to be a man, the gentleman who taught me how to hunt and fish and the things that you do in rural America, is standing there telling me, don't come back to the country. Well, that sparked something in me. And every day that I wake up and I go to work with the good folks at USDA Rural Development, because they have the same mentality, we work day in and day out to change that narrative so parents can tell their kids, you come back to the country, because there are opportunities. There are organizations like a Rural LISC that actually is doing good work to change this narrative, to make sure that there are opportunities for all kids, regardless of where they live, where they're born, where their geography. So that's really what drives us and motivates us in rural development. And I could not be prouder of the team that I have at USDA Rural Development. I like to say that we have the best and the brightest folks really focusing on a lot of the issues that we encounter in rural America. But what I am keenly aware of, and I'll say this and really close out, what I am keenly aware of is we could not do this work without great partners like Rural LISC. You all are right there in the communities. And again, policy is great, rules are great, regulations are great, but we need people at the end of the day, people that understand the communities that we serve. And that's where Rural LISC come in. And we want to thank Rural LISC. I've been actually doing a lot of reflecting in the last, actually the last month, really, to be honest with you, after there was a little election in November. And so some of the positions in rural development will change. My title will change. My position will change. But what will not change is my commitment to rural America. Wherever I am, I will be fighting for rural America. And it's not only me, the state directors, we're invested. We're invested in winning for rural America. We have, I don't know, maybe about 6, 7 state directors here at this conference. I know Will McEntee will be fighting for rural America. Please know that we're not giving up the fight. We know that there's a lot of work that continues to needs to happen in rural America. And what I want to just emphasize as I close some of these remarks. Oh, and I'm sorry, I meant to actually recognize Karama Neal. She's an Arkansas, because here's the thing. When I got to rural about Karama Neal, she we used to work there. I mean, when she was at USDA Rural Development as our administrator for RBCS. I mean, tremendous thinker. And you're talking about brilliant, best and the brightest. Karama Neal is just a tremendous, and thank you so much for being here, Karama. Get to know Karama if you don't know her. She will change your life. She has some ideas, suggestions, always had recommendations and suggestions. Yeah, oh yeah, she will. She said amen over here, right? Yeah. And but again, that goes back to the general principle of what we're talking about. It really comes down to people who understand and people who are willing to stay in this fight with you, because it's not easy. What we do know, if it were easy, these issues would have been resolved a long time ago. It takes perseverance, it takes commitment, it takes intentionality to stay on that battlefield, to continue to fight for the things that rural America needs, whether it's clean water, affordable housing, childcare, clean energy. Again, these are the things that we need to fight for. And that's what I'm going to ask for your support and your continued partnership. As I'm reflecting and I'm moving off the stage from this position, and I'm excited about what we were able to do for USDA Rural Development, because we're leaving USDA Rural Development in a good position. Again, increase the personnel, we reduce some of the obstacles to some of our programs. I had a meeting, this was maybe a couple of months ago, with RCAP, the CEO of RCAP, Olga Morales-Pate. And because what we try to do in rural development is to meet with our partners like LISC, and just talk about issues, how we can be better partners. And one thing that Olga said, it really struck me. She said, Basil, I've been doing this work for more than 25 years. And she said, and it is becoming harder and harder for us to get funding from rural development. And she said this, she said, it seems like you all are really putting the priority on the paperwork over people. You really need to focus more on the people, because at the end of every project, every dollar that goes out the door, there are people. And so we have several initiatives in rural development. One is called Better Grants, Better Service, really reducing the paperwork, trying to give everyone access to the programs and the grants that we have at rural development. And it's really challenging. It is absolutely challenging. I was in Georgia about 6 weeks ago. I was in Georgia, and I met a farmer who was talking about trying to get a loan for some of the businesses he was trying to do on his farm. And he was just saying, Basil, it is so hard to get a loan as a farmer or a farm business operator, agribusiness. He said, but he's also a medical doctor. He's a physician. And he said, Basil, it is so easy for me to get a loan as Dr. Smith. I can't get a loan as Farmer Smith. We need to change this process. They're lining up to give me money as a physician, as a doctor, but they're not lining up to give me any money to help me on my rural farm. We need to change that process. We need to look at how we can fund rural businesses just as we fund other entities, whether it's healthcare in rural America as well. So we need to look at our processes. That's what we've really focused on, reducing the barriers, making our programs more accessible to the communities that we need to serve here. I just wanted to thank LISC for their tremendous great work, their partnership. And my ask is that you continue to do the great work that you do, that you continue to not only support rural America and the organizations that support rural America, but continue the advocacy as we move into a different administration. I want you to know that I'm going to be rooting for the incoming administration to be successful for rural America. I'm going to be rooting for the for government to work well, because that's what we are here to do. That's what we and here's the thing too, and oftentimes many communities, many minority communities, many communities of color have always believed in the best of America. I go, as Ronald indicated earlier today, I travel in this position. I travel across the country looking at the projects that we implement through rural development. And here's what I see, whether I'm in Oklahoma, North Dakota, South Dakota, Georgia, Mississippi. Here's what I see. I see the people at the end of these projects. And regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat, black, white, I see the same commitment that we have far more in common than we do that divides us. And if we focus on our commonness, the things that really, we all want the same things for our families, for our community, good schools, good housing, we all want the same. But oftentimes there's so much distraction about the divisions. Let's focus on what brings us together as Americans. I see that across the country. And that's so exciting to me, because I just see that the true essence of rural America, people wanting things better for themselves and their neighbors as well. So I'm asking LISC to stay in the fight. I really appreciate the continued partnership that you've had. But as we move into the new administration, I want you to continue your advocacy, because rural development is a valuable jewel that's badly needed in the United States. And I just want to make sure that LISC and rural development stays viable, stays there on the ground and there in your community, making a difference. So every opportunity you get to talk to either your congressional delegations or elected officials, please talk about the tremendous programs that we have, not only in rural development, but USDA and in other federal areas as well, whether it's energy, Treasury. Talk about how government has impacted your communities. Because that's what we are really here to do, to change lives and transform communities. And I am so delighted and so proud that we were able to do that in USDA rural development, working alongside the good people in our organization, but working alongside the great partners that we have here in Rural LISC. So again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for your great work. Continue to make a difference and advocate for rural America. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gooden. I appreciate that, and I appreciate everyone's patience. We have one more wonderful panel planned, and so at this time, I'd love to invite my friend and colleague, Deanna Hamilton, to join me on stage, and as well as the panelists that will be featured in this conversation. Lee Jones, Executive Director of the Rural Partners Network, RPN USDA. Sara Hiller, Senior Director of Management, Mastercard, Strive USA. Kim Davis, Senior Advisor for the Delta Region led Walton Family Foundation. And of course, Stephanie Stone from HUD, who's going to be joining us virtually.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Okay.
She's joining us virtually.
Yes, she's joining.
Oh, my mic is live. Understood. Do you?
I'm sorry, excuse me.
So good morning, everyone. Do you want to stand up and take a deep breath so we can get some oxygen? It matters. I know you've been sitting, so we can stand, take a deep breath, let it out, get some oxygen to the brain. It'll make you feel a lot better. Take a sip of water if you need to.
There we go.
Okay? Awesome. All right, you can, if you're taking your deep breath, let's sit and let's get into this amazing panel and this amazing discussion. So good morning.
Good morning.
I have some questions for you, and I don't believe you received these ahead of time. So are you going to be mad at me? Okay.
No.
Good.
Keep us on our toes.
So I'm Deanna Hamilton, the Senior Vice President of Development for LISC. And I've been in that capacity for about 5 months now. I've been doing community investment as a board member for about 25 years. And one of the reasons that I agreed to this role, the work that LISC does is beyond impactful across this country. And I've been raising money as a board member forever, so somebody's paying me to do that. Who would have thought? But in the public and private sector, and what I've learned in the work that happens at LISC, not just in urban centers, but rural LISC specifically, as Undersecretary Gooden mentioned, is a necessary conversation. And it is one that we must really dig into and find solutions for. It's about intention, strategic alignment, and focus so that we can find viable solutions to ensure that we're continuing to invest in and grow the areas that actually provide us our food. It's things we don't really think about when we're moving and living, but we need our rural areas to have economic focus because they are the ground for us. And we live off of everything that they do. And I don't think sometimes when we're in urban centers, we realize that. I think everybody in rural will say yes, yes.
Indeed.
I would agree. Okay. So we're going to move into the conversation around driving investment in rural for private and public funding. So I'm going to start with, I have a couple questions here that I think would add some tremendous value to the audience. So I'm going to start with you. Is it Lee?
That's correct.
Yes, because of what you do. Talk a little bit about some of the most significant challenges that you believe in rural areas and what they're facing today and how they can attract public and private funding. for those challenges?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm Lee Jones. As you know, I serve as Executive Director for the Rural Partners Network. That's an excellent question, and we note that in our creation of Rural Partners Network, we wanted to establish a mechanism by which we could address specific barriers that prevent certain rural communities from being able to access the resources that they need to address the everyday problems that they have on their terms in the places that they call home. So part of our work with Rural Partners Network was predicated on not only working closely with the communities, but also working with our federal partners. As Dr. Gooden mentioned, Rural Partners Network is also an all of government approach by which we want to ensure that not only rural development, but also our federal partners such as HUD and EDA, and you go down the laundry list of the alphabet soup, and they're all participating with us, that they're able to have an intentional focus on these rural communities. And the specific rural communities that we're targeting here through Rural Partners Network are those that are generally marginalized, under-resourced, lack capacity. You can use all the buzzwords. I have a colleague that calls it poverty porn, excuse that, but nonetheless, we're looking at it from that perspective and wanting to make sure that we're able to provide those solutions. So we do also understand that a lot of it is muscle memory. Some of the accessing federal programs is about having access to it in the first place. Often in these under-resourced rural communities, you don't know that the program exists to even know that you can apply for it. And if you are able to apply for it, you're in this competitive landscape by which you probably are not in position to necessarily compete. If you're Tunica, Mississippi, and I believe Dr. Willis walked out, I'm going to pick on him a little bit though. But if you're Tunica, Mississippi, you may have a hard time competing with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So we're looking at it from the perspective of providing that extra capacity, that extra assistance that's needed, and that's through the collaboration with our staff. We have several Rural Partners Network staff that are in the room. I hope you'll wave your hand, stand up really quickly, hey folks, as well as a number of folks that are on the line that dedicate themselves to providing that very type of assistance. But it doesn't happen without collaboration with our partner organizations as well. Organizations such as Rural LISC, Partners for Rural Transformation, that are able to provide that extra level of technical assistance that helps rural communities, get over that hump. And I think we're just scratching the surface. Of course, we are keenly focused on transition as well. However, we're also very optimistic about the work that we're doing. And I will say that in this discourse, we see a lot of conversation about the nature and quality of federal employees. Well, I will say that this has been some of the most fulfilling and rewarding work that I've ever done as a career employee. What I can assure everyone here is, as it relates to Rural Partners Network, these are dedicated, hardworking people. And when you think about a collaboration amongst 25 federal agencies, it doesn't get more efficient than that.
Awesome. And I would agree. It is the most impactful work that we will ever do. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Kim, can you speak to that same question, but from your lens and what you see in the role that you serve, especially as the Delta Region lead?
Yeah, I will. First of all, thank you all. I know it's been a long morning, so I really thank you for kind of working and being and doing what you do on a daily basis. I'm going to start off talking a little bit differently, though. Because the last couple of days I walked into this hotel. First of all, applause to the staff of the hotel. They've done a phenomenal job, I think, in taking care of us. Can we give them a round of applause? And this will tell you how my brain works, how it pings all over. Because I don't know who made the coffee the last few days, but it was like my grandmama was in the back.
There you go.
Right? And it was one of those silver pots that you put on the stove, that perk at the top.
I would agree.
Right? Those of us born before bottled water, I know you know what we're talking about. It got me to thinking about, and I'm going to give a couple of shout outs because it's holiday season, so please feel free to write these down. It got me to think about some of the small organizations and communities in which Walton focuses on that are doing amazing things. It got me thinking about Meraki Roasters. And I know Ben is here, or he was here in the back. Ben, wave your hand back there. A really phenomenal organization, Meraki Roasters, right? You can buy your coffee from Meraki online. They're based in Clarksdale, Mississippi, right? And utilize that funding to do some soft skills training with the youth in that community, right? And for those of you who want to put a little something extra in your coffee, I'm going to point you to Delta Dirt Distillery.
There you go.
Right? And Helena, West Helena, which I talk about them so much, I try to tell them, y'all know I'm family, right? Like, give me the discount. but Delta Dirt Distillery, it's quite interesting, the story that they have, a real phenomenal story in which you have a generational approach to building this distillery, right? Great-grandfather was a sharecropper, eventually was able, through some real guile approach to get the land. Grandfather decided to stop doing soybeans and typical cotton, decided to do sweet potatoes, right? His son came along, who's about my age now, went off to college. We heard this from Basil, right? Went off to college. But actually, the family said, okay, we got to now give you this farm. And he said, not really interested in doing farming. Mm-hmm. His children came along and said, you know what's hot right now, Daddy? Everybody's doing distilleries, right? So it is the only African-American owned farm to bottle distillery in the United States of America, right? 2024, headed to San Francisco. They put their sweet potato vodka against all the vodkas that are out there right now, came away with the platinum award for their vodka. Awesome. Right? So for those of you who like a little something in your coffee, look up Delta Dirt Distillery out of Helena, West Helena, right? And it's trying to revitalize what's happening. So when I think about this work and I approach this work, I think about those entities that are doing really remarkable work in these small communities. I have the privilege of leading the work that the Walton family has done for a number of years in these really small communities. But I also have the privilege of getting to know these folks in these communities in a very real way. And so my goal has always been to look at organizations like LISC and what they're doing, and how do we amplify that, right? To look at organizations like RPN and say, okay, how do we get next to RPN and really amplify the work that they're doing, right? One thing that we recognized in the private philanthropic space is we heard a lot of national funders saying, hey, we want to figure out how to fund in these communities, but we don't have people in place. We don't have the infrastructure in place to make that happen. And so we started getting calls. I started getting calls. My colleague, Abe Hudson Jr., who lives in Clarksdale, Mississippi, started getting calls from folks saying, help us out here. So we got together with about 35 other philanthropic organizations and formed what we called Delta Philanthropy Forum, right? We looked at what's happening in Appalachia and we say, hey, we could do that in the Mississippi, Arkansas Delta, right? And so it is a coalition of funders that are there not only to think about how we strategize and implement our own individual strategies, but how do we provide an on-ramp for others who are interested in working deeply in these communities, where we can amplify not only the work that the public dollars that are happening, but how do we get private dollars to come alongside and really move these communities forward?
I like that as a fundraiser, as a serial entrepreneur. She didn't read my bio, so you guys don't know that part of my life. To amplify the businesses that you just amplified in this room was amazing. There's one thing or two, I've heard it from both of you, technical assistance, technical assistance, technical assistance. What I learned when I was building my business, it's product, people, process, profitability. And oftentimes, I don't care if you're a farmer, if you're a distiller, the people and the process get lost. Oftentimes we focus on the product and making money and don't realize that operational development and organizational development is the key to get to the profitability. And so it's the same thing that I'm learning when we talk about organizations that we're supporting across LISC that provide the technical assistance, capacity building, and also when I'm talking to funders who are trying to figure out what their social impact strategy needs to look like, or they're funneling money to organizations and are not getting measured outcomes. So do you find that, and I'm going to go to Sara really quickly on my next question. And I'm bringing that up because it is so key, even when you're talking about investments in rural areas, in urban centers, that capacity building and technical assistance is paramount in order to ensure that the public and private funding is sustainable. And so, Sara, we talked a little bit on yesterday about what some of the advice needs to be to our organizations, especially on the economic development side, that are looking for funding, and as well as our housing and affordable housing builders that are looking for funding. What is some of the advice that you can give to rural communities and organizations to better position themselves to be able to receive what Kim just talked about?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Morning.
I'll start off by saying that we are one of those big national funders that have come to Rural LISC to say, hey, we are really interested in supporting small businesses, but we don't know how to support rural small businesses, right? And a recognition of their expertise. But to back it up a little bit, I am the Senior Grants Manager for the Mastercard Strive USA program, which is funded by the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth and implemented by my company, DAI. And we really serve as a philanthropic intermediary. So MasterCard wanted to design a program to support small businesses all across the US, and they came to DAI to talk about how they could possibly do that. And so we really serve as the intermediary to talk to nonprofits and say, hey, what do you really need in this time and in this space, right? There's so much money coming down through the federal government, right? We've heard about GGRF and IRA and SSBCI and CHIPS and this whole alphabet soup of federal programming. What could MasterCard as a corporation, but also as a philanthropic resource, provide to you? I think we really heard that there's a real need for core operational capacity, right? And so we have started making grants to small business intermediaries, CDFIs, business development organizations, to really invest in all of you. You are frequently the deployment partners for some of these federal government programs. You are the ones that are preparing small businesses to be able to receive those programs. And so we recognize that an investment in you is what is actually going to enable that and make sure that rural small businesses aren't left out of this incredible moment that we're seeing for entrepreneurs all across the US, right? After decades of decline, there's a huge increase in entrepreneurship, small business filings across demographic lines, across geographic lines, and that's an exciting moment. And so, right, for all of you in this room, I think this is something we at DAI often push our funders to do, and many funders are good at, but really making that connection when you're asking for funding to your core operational capabilities, right? Frequently funders want to fund a one-off program that really focuses on your end client, right? Which is frequently your small businesses. But how can you really make the case that, right, if I as a funder invest in you, in your technology capabilities, in a new marketing plan for you, that really enables you to provide better services and more services to your small businesses, and really making that connection between really an investment in you is an investment in that small business client at the end. And I think I wrote down actually a quote from, I think it was Javier Zapata yesterday in his fireside chat, where he really said, and actually I'm going to read it word for word, sustainability of the organization is the foundation for doing more and better work. And that really stuck with me, and something I think as funders we can all really strive for. And I think something that Rural LISC is helping us do specifically with rural BDOs as we actually, I'll use this as a moment to plug our sponsorship of the Rural BDO Network. We're providing all sorts of technical assistance in partnership with Rural LISC to really build the capacity and capability of the Rural BDO Network in this time. So if you haven't applied already, go to the Rural LISC website, click on the BDO page, and come join us at MasterCard.
Awesome.
Can I add to that just
Please.
a little bit? And because I want to, one, amplify everything you just said, but also I want to make sure that I don't leave this stage without a little bit of a call to action in this way. First of all, when I think about the work, and folks who've had this conversation with me, I always talk about coming to the work, particularly from private philanthropy, with a jersey, not a cape. Right? You're not a superhero. No, I have real issue in the private philanthropic space when individuals think their role is to come in, drop a few dollars and leave, as opposed to being a part of a team in very rural communities, right? And being a part of a team, what that means is you're going to sometimes get feedback that even as the funder, you need to be comfortable in hearing, right? The other thing that I think is important when you are a part of a team is when things don't go well, you provide the feedback to individuals. One of my pet peeves that I have with private philanthropy is, and this is a very real issue. I remember once I got a call from another philanthropic organization. They said, hey, Kim, we're looking at funding this nonprofit. And we just want to understand, we know you've done some work with them. Can you help us understand a little bit more about the organization? And I gave them my perspective, and they probably had 5 or so folks on their team, and they were on the call, and it was just me. And I gave them my perspective. The thing you'll know about me is I'm going to give it to you straight, right? Good, bad, and different, because I think that's how you then get through to building a plan to get to the other side, right? And I gave them the information. They said, well, Kim, we asked them these questions, and what we got back didn't really meet kind of our standard. And I said to them, I said, well, what did you tell them? And they said, we didn't say anything. And I said, well, now I got an issue with you. I said, now we got beef, right? because if you are comparing some of these small, local, rural organizations to nonprofits that have been established for over 100 years in very urban environments, right? In this case, it was a situation where, and I'll be fully transparent, it was a funding toward an HBCU. And I knew that HBCU had a development office that had been stood up, right, in the last 10 years. And you're comparing them to institutions who have had development offices for hundreds of years.
With $1 million endowments.
$1 million endowments. And the least you can do is then be a part of that team and saying, we aren't able to fund you now, and here are the reasons why. In addition to that, let me help you understand who you can talk to in order to bridge that divide and bridge that gap. Now, to be fair, that's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time, right? But until we start to think about how we wear a jersey with these communities, and we don't operate with a superhero cape, kind of sprinkling dollars here or there, we're always going to run into this gap divide around knowledge, information, and being able to get folks to the other side.
I forget that I'm on a live mic, and I'm trying not to cut him off by doing what we call having church, by saying yes and amen and all those little words that you throw out. One of the things I have always said is that relationships are partnerships. When you decide to enter any relationship transactionally, then you get transactional outcomes, and the input is just as important as the output. So I am very glad that you said that, because in partnerships, it is mutually beneficial, mutually rewarding. It has shared value for measurable outcome. And so you have to be in partnership to have those type of conversations. There's some developers in the room, and I'm going to stay in the same vein, but shift a little bit so we can get Stephanie into this conversation. Because our mayor, and so I live in Atlanta, and our mayor ran on the platform of affordable housing. And so as you can imagine, the crisis that we're in affordable housing, everyone decided that they wanted to be a developer because we're in a crisis and there's supply and demand. But everybody is not ready to develop, and everyone is not ready to scale. And most people don't even understand what scaling really means. And so based on what you just heard Kim say, Stephanie, and understanding the technical assistance that's required, I can only imagine what HUD sees. The technical assistance that's required from a development lens, specifically in rural areas. And on yesterday, we had an opportunity to tour a site in Arkansas in Pine Bluff, where they're building, they're developers that are building, I'm losing the word, but It wasn't necessarily micro homes. Modular, that's my word. Thank you. Whew. I'm not gonna tell y'all why that's happening. Modular homes, and the concept was amazing. I took copious notes, but he said something so key when we were standing in his build facility, and that was streamlining the operational process so that they can produce faster. And so can you talk about or give an example, just from a developer perspective, of what must be done by developers when they're coming to do business or attempting to do business with HUD, and to ensure that they can actually get across the threshold?
That's a great question, and I appreciate where you're coming from with it. I think for developers, relationships with HUD, so much for HUD stems around our relationship to the communities that are building and the grantee or those who have the direct funding relationship. And so I would say having a strong presence of that, you know, local government or nonprofit partner, however it's being structured, at the table and really coming to HUD sort of unified. We're in lockstep. We have a plan. You know, this is the site plan. This is the environmental review. The stronger the partnership that you present to HUD, I feel like it's just better when we see that all the pieces are there and it's not, you know, a for-profit trying to leverage something. I'm not specifically the part of HUD that, you know, interfaces with developers. So I want to acknowledge, you know, my response is sort of general, though I do oversee our technical assistance programs that help support communities, including rural communities, with capacity building in whatever form they need, including around affordable housing and getting partners at the table, removing red tape, understanding how to navigate the complex federal, you know, landscape of resource opportunities, how to apply and be competitive, and then how to implement those things. We know that it's no small feat to even get to the table and get the funding, but then to implement the funds, navigate all of the requirements and regulations and ensure that you're reporting, all of that's a really big burden for, in particular, any partner, but in particular our partners where they have a smaller staff and they're operating with less resources at the baseline. And so technical assistance, the programs that we run are available for bringing third parties like LISC, who's been a longtime technical assistance provider that HUD funds, and then we deploy in kind of a demand response model where we ask them to go to places and help them navigate whatever their priority issue is. So it could be, you know, I was just talking to a small community in West Virginia that's working on a Section 202 elderly affordable housing development. And I was talking to the developer who's requesting the technical assistance. We can send a firm like LISC in to help really work with the community on their site plans, on understanding their requirements, you know, educating them, helping them navigate those next steps, ensuring they're engaging the community's voice in the process. That's a lot of what HUD offers. And I don't know that enough places, in particular, rural and smaller communities, are aware that all you have to do is raise your hand and say, HUD, we could use support, and we can offer that to help you navigate that. So that's an indirect way of answering your question about the developer perspective. But certainly the developers can be at the table with our partners in that process. And we encourage that. I love what Kim said about putting on the jersey. I think that's absolutely how we see this capacity building approach in the program that we run, where we send providers like LISC in to support as they are at the table, rolling up their sleeves, helping the community address what's important to them, whether it's, you know, their fiscal health, their organizational development, which I heard someone speak about, or, you know, navigating federal opportunities. We're here for all of that in our community, in our TA programs.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Well, I'm going to say navigating federal agencies is challenging. I've had to do it myself personally, and it's a heavy lift. And Undersecretary Gooden said that. How do rural communities or organizations within those communities get on the radar of those agencies and the philanthropy of those agencies? I'm going to ask Stephanie, and then I'm going to go back to Lee with that question. because we have a lot of those organizations in the room. And it sounds good, but when you click that link, it's a different conversation.
Amen. I do understand that and I appreciate it. I've been in those shoes as well. So for HUD, to access technical assistance where we can send a technical assistance provider in to help, I truly believe this when I say it, guys, don't laugh. It is actually a low barrier of entry and it is easy. You just need to essentially Google HUD technical assistance, but it's on our hudexchange.info webpage, and you request assistance. It's literally a simple form where you just indicate, who you are, what you need help with, and any specifics of what you have in mind. You hit submit. And someone at HUD then kind of assesses it. We will definitely reach back out, ask you questions, but it truly is that simple. And I do want to highlight that we do have a lot of participation in interagency groups like the Rural Partner Network, and we work with other partners to shape the TA, to make sure that we bring folks to the table. And again, LISC is a TA provider who's highly knowledgeable in that. So it's truly a matter of submitting a simple online form, and HUD will help get you to the right resources to navigate through the next steps. I also want to just highlight federal field offices. I really think that they are a great point of entry, at least with HUD, working with your local HUD field office. If you don't want to go online to that online form, reaching out to them and saying, I heard about technical assistance, can you reach out and help us get connected? We're also glad to talk with you and not have you submit a form. So we truly are available and accessible in our program. And I think it's just a matter of us getting the word out better.
All right. Well, I will give you credit. The regional offices actually in some markets do an amazing job. So I will say that when it comes to HUD. But Lee, can you add some depth to that question for me?
Yeah, I think I can. And first, I do want to acknowledge a colleague at HUD, and that several at HUD have noted that our name, Housing and Urban Development, is somewhat of a misnomer. So, like, we're often telling communities, like, yes, you're rural, but HUD can provide services to you. So, with that, I definitely applaud HUD for that.
Thank you.
But from the perspective of navigating federal resources, understand that even as federal employees, we have difficulty navigating some of those resources as well. I'm only saying that to underscore, if you're a rural community out in the audience today, listening online, if you're a technical assistance provider, it is okay to not be sure, and it is okay to ask questions. I actually encourage you guys to call in and ask those questions. Refer to Rural Partners Network. The easy way to access us is Rural Partners Network at USDA.gov. It's that simple. I encourage folks to reach out to us and engage us, not only because we can help navigate issues with rural development type programs, but also issues with programs with our federal partners. It's also the old adage that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Like, I know of communities that, we don't want to be an annoyance. Well, sometimes you have to be, especially when you're advocating for the rights of what you deserve at the community level. And frankly, it is a matter of what these communities deserve on their terms. So I think it's certainly important to make sure that you're staying engaged. If you pursue a federal opportunity and you are not successful, take your opportunity to understand why you were not successful. Take that opportunity to learn from that and try again. Like, don't be afraid to do that either. So I just think it's important for, just as we as federal employees and us in Rural Partners Network want to advocate for the rural communities, that has to be reciprocal as well, that the community has to advocate as well. And part of that advocacy is being persistent. Frankly, sometimes persistence is what gets the job done. I was radicalized, and that's a dangerous word to use, but understand the context here. I was radicalized very early in my career by a fellow employee, and not an indictment on that employee, but we were working on a water system, a very, very marginalized community, and the gentleman said, "Well, we're getting the water system; they should be happy." And I'm very early in my career. I kind of sat back like, wow. And as a young man, my first reaction was that was pretty racist, but it wasn't really racist. He's an equal opportunity jerk at that point. But with that in mind, it's just an understanding that we have to shift the paradigm, because I've heard transactional relationships a lot today. We have to remove the transactional nature of the relationship. We have to build partnerships with rural communities, and I appreciate the work that we're doing in the Rural Partners Network to do that. I also recognize that the Rural Partners Network is not everywhere. We're in a set number of states. If you visit rural.gov, that will show you where we are. However, the tools and resources that we develop are developed in such a way that they are accessible for any rural community. So we do encourage that additional interaction.
Awesome. I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I know we're running out of time. What sectors show the most potential for investment in rural areas? I'm going to ask Kim that question from the philanthropy, from the private lens, and then I'm going to come back to you, Lee, from the public lens.
Yeah, and I think it builds a little bit on what Lee was talking about. I think there is this move right now toward really a collaborative approach, right? We've been able to see when organizations have come together around an issue, what they're able to do, because then they begin to use some of the same common language, right? They begin to put in place a plan to sort of agitate and become top of mind. I think that's so very critical, that these communities are so far removed, which is why, you know, one thing that, something that we do at Walton is every 5 years, we look at creating a strategic plan, look at what we've done, look at where we would like to be, and seeing if those things are moving us in the right direction. And as we started to do that work, and the way we create that plan is it's not in isolation. We have conversations with many folks. And what we heard from some individuals and what we recognized, what there were these pockets of folks coming together to either advocate for, to address an issue, or to move something forward. Now, I think that historically, because these communities have been relatively small, everyone knows everyone, but there's also the mentality sometimes that there is not enough to go around, and therefore, if we have a relationship with Walton, we don't want everyone to have a relationship with Walton. And I've seen that shift. I've seen that dynamic begin to shift around no longer, regardless of where they are, they're all of our kids. And so how do we now come together to begin to leverage some things that make the most sense? So if you have a KIPP school, for example, who is really good at getting kids into college, and the traditional school district isn't the best, right? I've had KIPP and the traditional school district to say, we want to work together, and here's what we think they can do for us, and here's how we think we can support them in those efforts. So this idea around creating collaboratives around issues, I think becomes critically important to how we think about that work. The other thing we heard, and you heard me start off talking about Meraki Roasters. I'm going to say it again, Meraki Roasters. It's holiday time. Buy someone a nice gift, Meraki Roasters. Or right, if we're talking about Delta Dirt Distillery, holiday time. Buy a nice gift. Because the reason I do that, in all honesty, not only because I believe in those individuals and the products that are happening, but what I heard from community as well is they said, hey, Kim, you're Mr. Walton. You're on the stage all the time. How can you be the voice for us as we begin to develop these things? How do you use your megaphone to help bring light to some of the issues, concerns, products, those things that we have that may then drive individuals toward it? So this idea of becoming top of mind is not something that I think we can solely place on individuals. I think it's something that folks who sit in places like mine have a responsibility to do. And then the last thing I would say, so this idea of coalitions, the idea of using where you are to help advocate for others when they can't be in the same places and spaces. And the last thing is narrative change. We have to focus on changing the narrative around these communities. And there are individuals who are putting dollars behind narrative change. Yes. Nobody buys a ticket to the Titanic when they know it's sinking. So how we talk about these communities, right? And what happens, right? I do this thing in my head where I separate the idea of charity from philanthropy. That's correct. Right? What I talk about is philanthropy, right? The idea that there are individuals in a community that are making a difference to the outcome to the individuals in that community, and I run toward that, right? So how we talk about these communities, how we think about them and position them in the solutions around community, I think is critically important, right? And that is something that not only falls on philanthropy, on individuals that are in this room, it also falls on the community too, right? And that's part of the, when we have a conversation, people ask me all the time, they say, Kim, don't you get tired of people coming asking you for money? I said, that's kind of my gig. Like, I expect them to do so. If they're not doing that, I don't think they're doing what they should be doing, right? And so these conversations I have quite often. But when you enter into these conversations and folks approach it from a deficit mentality, like a completely deficit mentality, right? I'm like, whoa, let's switch this up. Right? Let's talk a little bit about the amazing things that are happening in these communities. And so I can rattle off a number of different stories, whether they're individuals who live in these communities who are doing amazing things, that are businesses that are doing amazing things, right? And then sort of say, oh, but think how much further we can bring them if we, philanthropy, just did this, right? So you don't approach it from that deficit mentality. You approach it with the asset framework. You change the narrative. And then people say, how do I get on that ship? That ship's sailing somewhere. I want to buy a ticket to that. And I want to play my little part to make sure that that happens.
Yes. So I call that victim language. And people have a tendency to do that when things don't work out well. And what I always say is, stay away from victim language. The question you should always ask yourself is, what must be true in order to get to X? Because there isn't really anything in this world that cannot be done. The question is, how much work are you willing to put in to get it done? And so oftentimes we can fall into victim language.
Yeah, and to be fair to those communities, I'm not going to ignore the fact that this inequity,
it is definitely
this racism, the sex, like generations of this has created this problem, right? And so I want to sit up here and folks think I'm sort of saying, you know, these communities need to blah blah. That's not what I'm saying, because I completely understand how individuals and communities have gotten there. Yes. So I see a lot of folks, when you ask the question about what's happening, what's getting funded in spaces, and how communities are thinking about themselves, that's how I talk about it, right? Last thing I'll say, and I know we are like right on time. When I talk about the work that Walton does in these communities in the Arkansas, Mississippi Delta, right? I equate it to the land of Oz. Right? I say instead of yellow brick roads, you have kind of meandering dirt roads, right? Instead of the Emerald City, you have the cut suit that sort of takes the shape of everything. And you want to talk about characters, right? You want to talk about lions, tigers, and bears. There's some characters when you start going in the deep South, right? For sure. Just a quick story, and it's one that I tell a lot. My colleague and I were driving, and we were going to obviously this historic barbecue spot, because there's always a historic barbecue spot, right, in the Delta. And this type of place that sells out really quickly. And so he called, and she answered the phone. She said, hey, what's your order, baby? Right? And he said, this is what I'd like. She said, okay, what's your name? He said, my name is Joe. She said, baby, pick another name. We got a Joe on the list, right? Right? I mean, how could you not love that? Right? And so there's just this colorfulness. I mean, I'm starting to take back some of the credit that we've given to some of these American authors from the South, because I'm like, y'all just wrote what y'all saw. Like, y'all, there wasn't too much imagination in this, right? So there's just such an amazing, rich cultural heritage there that we need to push to the forefront, that not only happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, it's happening today. That's influencing so much of how we do. So I want to make sure that we talk about these communities in the fullness that they deserve.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's not, my statement was not to say we don't have an equity issue.
Absolutely.
My statement is to say the goalposts will always be moved. Mm-hmm. The question becomes, what must we do to navigate around the goalpost? And for somebody who has in her entire career had to navigate around the goalposts, it's possible. I am a living, walking, breathing witness that it is possible. Mm-hmm. I sold a business in 2012, bootstrapped it, scaled it, and sold it. I would have never thought the little girl from Detroit would ever be in that position. And every step of the way, they move the goalposts. So it's the equity issue exists. The issues and I don't like to call them issues, I call them challenges. The challenges exist, but it's it's perspective. It's how you think about it. And when resources are there, and even when they're not there, again, Undersecretary Gooden said it well, how are you telling that story to your state legislators? Because I also sat in the State House. So how are you telling that to your state legislators? How are you telling that to your congressional leaders? So that your issues, your challenges are on the radar. You can't just do it from the seat. Public and private funding, you have to be able to get into the faces of the people who are making those decisions so that you can get to your desired outcome. And how you talk about it, narrative, storytelling is imperative. A LISC, a rule LISC, and the agencies that are sitting here, I always say we have an innate responsibility to be the advocate of the change at all times and in all spaces. But organizations, she's like, get off the stage, got it. But yourself as organizations and or entrepreneurs also have a responsibility to tell your story. You have to know the rooms that you must show up in so that your challenges are being heard. And oftentimes that's in your municipality, that's in your state house, that's with your congressional leaders. You have to amplify that narrative and make sure that storytelling is in place so they are crystal clear on what the needs are, because they're all over the place. So you always have to stay on their radar and in their face. So
I think it's also, I'm sorry, just really like telling the story of the need is certainly important, but it's as important to tell the story of how you address that need.
Correct.
To those decision makers. Like that's so
Absolutely.
important. So I appreciate you bringing up the storytelling aspect of it. So not only to like legislators, but also congressional leaders and people at the White House. Like, tell your story. I know it's short term now, but to people like Kellyanne and Will that are in the room with us as well. So like being able to do that and make sure that those decision makers understand the need to continue that opportunity, because there are other communities that are going to have that same need.
Correct.
And need the opportunity to be able to address it as well.
Correct. Add to that.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think a real reason we partnered with Rural LISC was a recognition of their deep relationship and shared trust with all of you in rural communities across America. And so I think we've only been partnered with Rural LISC for I think 3 or 4 months now, but we have already seen how they are taking your voice and amplifying that, right? We're not a deep in community funder. And so we partner with organizations like Rural LISC that have this big association to bring people together. We're partnered with Inclusive to reach credit unions. We're partnered with the Opportunity Finance Network to reach CDFIs. And so we're seeing how these incredible networks who have deep relationships with you are amplifying those voices to us as their funders, but also helping us to tell your stories as well. And I think just in this short time, that has become really, really apparent. The strength of Rural LISC in that amplification.
Yes. Stephanie, did you want to add to that before we go to the audience with maybe one question or two? No.
No, not necessarily. Go ahead to the questions.
All right. We're going to wind down because I know we started late. Nadia, are we able to ask? Okay. I was.
That makes it so you want to fund, you want to fund, you want to support, you want to back them, you want to mention their business name 3 or 4 times every time you get the mic. Is there a tip you can guide us with?
You want to?
Feels like it's one about funders.
Well, you know, I was going to say, did you want to answer that, Kim? I'm not a funder, but what I will say is I raise the funds. And the way that I like to tell the story is to offer what Lee said, is here is how we're solving. Here are the issues, and I keep saying issues. Here are the challenges we're solving in the marketplace. And here's the strategic alignment and the value proposition of why you, funder, needs to find us at the table. And here's the measurable impact of those outcomes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for me, storytelling is, it's a little bit of the hook. It makes me want to know more, particularly when storytelling leads to impact and what that might look like, whether it is 10 people, 200 people, or 2,000 people, like what, help me, right? So that storytelling is the hook that makes me go, let's have another conversation, right? Because there is so much more that goes into it in regards to strategies, in regards to metrics, and like all of that needs to happen. But that sort of storytelling provides a little bit of a hook to say, let's continue this conversation. Let's figure some things out. And I want to see where this is kind of going. But without that, right? Without that story, right? It's kind of like that dry Thanksgiving turkey. I mean, you got it because it's Thanksgiving, but it's not what you really want, right? So anyway, that's how I think about it.
Yeah.
And I'll just, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying to kind of lean on the theme we've had throughout the conference of these are mutually beneficial relationships, right? And so especially if you're talking to a corporate philanthropy like Mastercard, remember, like they're not just doing this for you, right? It's helping them meet strategic objectives. And there's a lot of power in remembering that, right? Because I think frequently in philanthropy, there's a real power imbalance. And whenever you're going to ask for money. But I think when you go and ask for that money, remembering that they have strategic objectives that you can help them reach, and then using those storytelling hooks to make that case is huge. And so going into those rooms, remembering that yes, funders have the money, but you also have something that they want and they need.
Yeah, it's a little different for us in that, you know, from the federal perspective, communities have to apply and pursue these various programs. But from the RPM perspective, there's also the advocacy and working with federal partners that may be able to address the need. So specifically, I think about like, you know, Fulton County, Kentucky is one of our more aggressive community networks out there. All of them are wonderful, don't get me wrong, but have just seen a lot of great movement in Fulton County, especially around the housing focus, where they, you know, for a generation, should I say, they had not been building homes there. So their story was so compelling that, you know, through that collaboration with HUD, through Rural LISC, through RPN, they're now building houses in Fulton County, Kentucky. And it's just a wonderful story, and looking forward to be able to tell that story more.
And I'd just add to, through HUD's technical assistance, that's something that we could deploy a provider to help a community work on that narrative and storytelling and be, you know, competitive in federal funding opportunities or, you know, in approaching philanthropic partners. So I just want to note that that's an opportunity we can offer. It's not something we require you to have at the time of telling us you'd like to raise your hand to be considered for TA.
Awesome. So in closing, I would just say, I want to say two things. Private investment focuses on market opportunities and profitability. Public investment focuses on economic development, social equity, and sustainability. You must know the difference. That's number one. And number two, when raising funds, marketing, communications, and fundraising do the two-step. They are dance partners. So that narrative and that storytelling is key when you are trying to raise funds. You must be able to effectively tell your story, show strategic alignment, ensure that it is mutually rewarding, and that you know exactly what your intended outcomes would be. What are you solving for? That's my dot. I hope you got something out of this panel discussion. We want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and their insight. Let's give them a round of applause. And thank you, Rural LISC, for having us. Thank you,
everyone.
Nadia.
Thank you all so much. It's been such a pleasure to work with all of you. Yes.
You want us to, we can leave the
Yes,
stage.
I would like you to leave the
Okay.
stage now. Okay, we are getting kindly kicked out of this room, and we're a little off schedule. So we're having a plated lunch for lunch today. We have a Rural Champion Award ceremony that we're going to do during lunch around probably about 12:15, 12:20. You have to leave this room. You cannot come back in until 12:10. If you can take your stuff with you, there's coffee out in the hall. You can go to room C next door and you can sit and talk if you'd like. A couple really quick things. I know people couldn't see the slides during the green panel. They are downloaded on the app now. So if you go to the app and go to that session, you can pull all of those up there. We're also missing a black USDA portfolio. If anybody accidentally grabbed that, if you can just let us know, bring it out to the reception area, that'd be great. And I think that's it. So back here at 12:10, not a minute before, and we'll see you soon.